Have we comments or questions for Dr. Jihan? Okay. Could I ask something? I mean, I obviously am aware of your work, Jihan, and it's fantastic work, and particularly with engaging with youth. My question relates to what happens in later life when we engage with young people, because there are many good initiatives in the heritage sector which engage with young people. And then if there isn't this momentum that you are providing, what then happens? Because there are many cases where because of other pressures, you know, lots of what you communicate and how you engage sometimes gets lost or forgotten, or other things come in the way. So how can we break through that barrier to maintain this momentum, so when you stand back from your project, things are actually sort of put in place in a structural way to keep this going?
Yeah, I think, Mike, you are touching on a very difficult thing now that we're all struggling with, is that how can we have longer impact and continuity of the work that we are doing at the moment, and how can we make it more sustainable? The problem is that one of the big problems is that, as I mentioned, that once we get the fund, we're able to do amazing and great work. And then once the fund stops, our hands are held as well, and we cannot do really much. But I think part of it is that during the life span of the project, I think the training element and the capacity building element is an important one. Along with the research, we are training them how to be sustainable, how to take the lessons that they are learning from us to make it more long-term lessons for them. Definitely, the more young people engaged in that, we will have better results. And just to say that working with the youth people could be a little bit of a different experience of working with normal, ordinary children or older people, because you can feel the willingness in their attitude and enthusiasm to do something. They are always thirsty for making change. They are always thirsty for learning more. And just to reflect a little bit on for example, you know, the project we completed, the Bikami project we completed in Cairo. Despite that, we work with children, and we left and we are now back in the UK, but the connections with the museums are still active. And in particular, because we have done more of the extensive work with the National Railway Museum in Egypt, where we had the children around us, we co-produced the activities, we had them to test it, we had them to come back. And I'm really fascinated that after 2 and 3 years, I can still see how the work is continuing. So through the links with the institutions, the cultural institutions themselves, because they are seeking, they want to make the change. So one of the things is keeping the strong connections with the international partnership. That's really important, because they are the people on the ground, they are the people in the place, they are staying there, they are having the direct connection with the communities, they're having the direct connections with the marginalized children who are not able to reach us. So that's a really important thing, to have that collaboration strong, ongoing, sustainable, and working. And through them, you will be able to facilitate as much ideas as you want. So, and I'm talking 3 years now after we left and stepped out of that project, that we still have the connections going on. They requested the copyright of the work and the brochures and the activities that we have developed. They keep asking for reproduction of that. We are monitoring how the visitors numbers are increasing year after year, and I'm happy to say that by last year the visitors increased by 22% comparing to 2016 and 2015. So this is the kind of really sustainable impact and things that we are really thrilled to see how it works even after we left out of the project. Definitely on the other side, we're trying to keep the momentum going with requesting more funds and having more money to go back. This is something happening again in the background, but I think the partnership is really important into that discussion.
I have so many questions and comments, but I would like to open it up to all of our participants for your questions and comments.
Mike, may I just alert you that maybe the chat box may not be working. So if any of the participants see the questions, they may raise their hands and then you can really call their names to speak.
Okay. So let me see. Yes, I have a Mahmoud Kayat. Have you a question?
Yes, I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. It's a comment, actually. I am very happy to be here today. And hello, Ghada. It is,
yes, hello, Mahmoud. Hi.
Hi, and it is very, very nice opportunity to hear your voice again and see this passionate and willful presentation. And Dr. Sabih, thank you very much for this invitation. And Dr. Jihan, it was very good to see you again and listen to this very interesting presentation of yours. And actually, Dr. Mike, your intervention, the first intervention, was very important for me because it's raised a question, the start of a question, and you asked why and for whom. So if I summarize these three presentations, your questions, Dr. Jihan's very interesting experience, and this passionate story map of Dr. Ghada, we are missing here something, and Dr. Ghada mentioned it, and Dr. Jihan also mentioned it in a way. Dr. Jihan said change. I may add to the change, the suitable change. And you said for whom and why to preserve heritage. Dr. Ghada raised the question, the comparison between Rashid Street and Mutanabbi Street. Mutanabbi Street survived because it has the third factor of sustainability, which is economy. So the economy is there, the motive is there. The people who are selling books, they are not selling books because it is a heritage. They are selling books because it is a continuously economic activity. So here, this is the question of mine. What is the motive for preservation? You said for whom and why. I may add a motive. So the awareness of youth, the young people, the young generation need to have a motive why to preserve. And for me, in my little city where I'm living, Erbil city, of course, the old Erbil city was a very small city, historical city, but now it is a big city. The modern city is big. So I found a clue. It is survival. For example, in Erbil city, there is no river, there is no it wasn't a very strong economical or military base in throughout 4 or 5 years of history of its life, but the people survived to live in a civilized manner for 5,000 years. So for youth, And I urge some students to do researches about heritage and why to use heritage. Maybe this may raise a question or may support this idea of why to preserve cultural heritage or built heritage. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Does anybody want to respond? I mean, it was addressed to both Ghada and to Jihan. To respond to that? Does anybody want to respond? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Jihan, do you hear Mike? Dr. Ghada, do you hear Mike? I hear him.
Yes, I hear now. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, does anybody want to respond, either Professor Ghada or Professor Jihan? You want to respond?
Jihan, do you hear the question?
Yes, is it a question for me or just waiting for somebody to comment?
It's actually Mike is asking for you to respond.
Or both,
All right.
both Ghada and
All right.
yourself.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were waiting for somebody on the floor. Yes, I definitely do acknowledge the importance of the economic perspective of understanding heritage and how that can be a way of preserving history and heritage in many places. And yes, indeed, similar to Rashid Street in Iraq, which I'm really looking forward to visit in the future after the COVID-19 lockdown is over. But I can also sense that in Cairo, for example, in the old alleyways of the vibrant historical areas of Fatimid Cairo and so on. And these places actually are really fascinating for myself as well, because yes, it is flourishing, it is continuing all these and preserving all these layers of history and heritage, which is strongly supported with economy and having sellers and vendors all around the streets during your movement, your walking. And I think that is what is bringing into the spirit of these places and making it really attached to the memories and the mental image of these places in the mind of the general public. And I'm not talking about a specific gender or a specific age, for example. So I think one of the key roles that we need to look at and we need to consider strongly when we step into contexts and places that are suffering from deterioration and degradation of the heritage for one reason or another is to consider how can we have a more sustainable economy going on and moving on for years and years, and we cannot neglect that aspect. Yes, in my talk I did focus on change, but because of the limitation of time I didn't go into that. But yes, it is important to look at it, and it is important also specifically when we try to reach for local communities in more remote places, in villages and towns, and specifically border regions, which are more vulnerable to conflict, which have limited access to funds, to training, to capacity building. The important support that is required to push that wheel of economy going on and on. So, for example, some of the work we're doing in Jordan, we are working with the local community of training and working with them to use their own skills in weaving, in food making, and trying to put more of secure plans and credible plans of how can that be a resource of income for them. Specifically, for example, when we work with tribal communities in Jordan, it's a bit of a difficult challenge for us how that can happen. But if we start to look at that bit by bit, you can start to see some reward coming out of it by dissemination, by displaying that. And again, trying to have more economy and income return at some way or another. So yes, that is an important one, and I think one of the things that came out of the project of recontextualizing contested heritage when we worked in Lebanon, Iraq, and Kosovo, and we started to compare the situation in the three contexts, I think the issue of economy came out strongly in the toolkit in the three regions. And specifically, the problem is that there is always a political and religious agenda behind preserving heritage, and specifically in the Arab world, that sometimes hinders and stops that process of going on. So we're looking at how can we release that? How can we take that kind of political agenda, that religious agenda, out of the mix of that and just focus on developing the economy, of training the community, of working closely with them, of supporting the handmade stuff they look for. Even if we're talking about food, we're talking about languages, we're talking about any products that's coming out of. So for example, Dr. Mahmoud just reflected on just selling books in Rashid Street is helping a lot, and we can see a lot of really successful examples all across the Arab world of places like that, which is really vibrant and flourishing and really sustainable until now. So thanks a lot for bringing up this.
Thank you, Jihan. If I can just open this up a little bit with regard to Garda's presentation, which, you know, it was very inspiring. I think it shows what you brought out, Garda, was the resilience, was human resilience. And I think resilience is a very important concept here. And if you put that resilience together with what Mahmoud is asking about motivation and economy, I think you have something very powerful. And I picked up on the two cases which were very interesting for me. One, because you were talking about the river as a natural heritage feature and something which has continuity and familiarity. And then with regard to Rashid Street in particular, which again has familiarity. And I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is recognize how heritage becomes embedded in our familiarity with our surroundings. And familiarity breeds confidence. Familiarity breeds a security. And it also, I think, provides partly this motivation. I think that is important. So it was a very important intervention, I think, for bringing some of these things together. And Mahmoud is quite right. I mean, you know, we have to think about how we bring, and Jihan has just mentioned this as well, how we bring economy and the desire for heritage together to form that basic motivation, because at the end of the day, decisions are made by politicians and economists. And, you know, we have to create livelihoods for people with all of these. So again, I just wanted to thank both of you again for excellent insights into this. But perhaps, Garda, you would like to comment a little bit on Mahmoud's question, which was about the economic motivation and how important that is for places like Rashid Street.
Yes. Well, being a consultant for the mayoralty of Baghdad, I was following all projects about Rashid Street. So they had in mind how to make it, how to implement it. They were thinking, actually, with the Solidaire model of Beirut, how to take all these properties and put them in one firm, and then we will come up with a development of the street. Actually, we as a consultant, we refused this, but there was no other option. People, I don't know, I think it is all over the heritage area. The owners of these buildings, their buildings are registered heritage. They cannot do anything with them. And at the same time, they are not profitable for them. So they are, and somehow they encourage letting them into fires and the deterioration, so they don't exist anymore, and they would sell the land and new buildings will come up. So in this pilot project that we're working on, the pilot project is to give them a good example of a profitable small project in one or two buildings, and this will encourage their neighbors and their neighbors and their neighbors. So it will not be really hard for them to work on their property with some facilitation from us, with some finance facilitation. And then, of course, with going on with the same function or relative function to what's going on with the live one, we would get to a real lifeful rehabilitation by the owners and still get some profits, and not only some profit, it would be profitable for them.
Yes. I think you make a really important point about when you list some of these buildings as heritage, they are in some ways overprotected. And people don't feel as though they can do anything with them, so they become a liability. People set them on fire, people let them go because they don't want to. So I think maybe, there needs to be a bit more balance in the way that we look at heritage, not just as something we protect, but as something we can adapt and change maybe the function of, because that may be the only way to preserve it.
Well, my presentation was much larger and I had another case. One of the cases I wanted to show, but then I was restricted by time, really, that there is a church in the center of the city. And it was deteriorating, and the owners, I mean, the religious people, just let it go. And when it went to almost full collapse, they gave it to an investor, but for a commercial investment. But they were bound to regulations. It was listed heritage. So what they did is they made the elevation of a church, the roof of domes, and the inside was a mall. This is a very good example. Of course, this is related also to something that we should take into consideration. The group of people leaving Iraq, especially minorities like Christian and Sabian and Yazidis, are leaving certain places. When I talked to the religious people for the church, they said, we don't have people to pray there. So it's better for us to have some income, some commercial income from that building. Well, this is another question to raise. Well, this is why I said presence of people. But when people are leaving, they are taking these images with them. They are building there something related to what they know in their places. It's a bigger question now for people living, but this is also a main problem that we have to face.
True. Earlier on, Professor Farhan, you had a question for Jihan. Could you return to that question? I think we had a bad connection before. I think you're on mute. That's it.
Now I think it's okay now?
It's fine. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Professor Mike. Thank you so much, Dr. Agad. Thank you so much, Dr. Jihan, for this fantastic question and answer and discussions. Actually, I asked before to Dr. Jihan about based on her experience, how in Middle East, how can we increase understanding conservation values level in regard to the humanitarian heritage?
Yes. So in I will not focus a lot on the humanitarian heritage itself, because I think this is something we are trying to research it and investigate it more. But from the work that I've done in the past years, I think the idea of working closely with marginalized and remote communities is really important. Those are the people that we are trying to reach in some way or another. Specifically, if we're looking at humanitarian aid and humanitarian support in some way or another. So we're looking at a different group of communities and people which we are not really used to work with. We're trying to develop capacity building and creative practices with them. So we need to strengthen their social resilience, impose some ideas of education programs, creative artistic production, which is focused on notions and ideas of humanitarian heritage. And because I'm an architect by background, I'm so interested in the idea of learning by doing, and that's why I'm very into the idea of co-production and co-design and co-creation methodologies and tools. So I think face-to-face communication and hand-to-hand work will have really successful and important outcomes out of that. Again, to re-understand, reconceptualize what is the idea of humanitarian heritage, what can we provide and what we can support communities who have been affected by destruction. And this is just for a very long time, not only in the recent 2011 events and onwards. So it is important to understand, specifically when working with young people and women, what are the shared values? What is the kind of creativity that they can interpretate in their history? What are their beliefs? Understanding the value through many of the means, like understanding the oral traditions, the folklore, the craft. For the young people, as I mentioned in my presentation, they're more interested in media and IT tools. So utilizing all these skills that they are interested in, I think that will be the gateway to reach a wider group of those stakeholders, both traditional and on the digital media side. The other side is the collaboration, is strengthening that collaboration, the researchers, and really involving into that mix non-academic partners as well, the civil society organizations, practitioners. In my case, I work a lot with museums and artists and curators, which is really crucial in developing that. So I do really acknowledge the important role of engaging with them through and building that route and that method of humanitarian heritage using arts, crafts, issues and skills that are really close to them, really easy for them to understand and to grasp. And also this is the same idea came out of the outcomes of the Recon Heritage project that we have just concluded last month, where we co-produced 3 toolkits that have been designed by the youth, stakeholders and cultural institutions, researchers, all sharing the interest to involve the youth in preserving that and to driving that idea of what does heritage mean for them. And again, taking it from physicality, that pot of physicality, into more different norms and ideas of understanding and communication. So how can we design programs that support youth-led cultural engagement? How can we take to do some documentation and cataloging for intangible places as well, intangible heritage as well, which is a little bit on the second row of understanding heritage, places that can give them hope for the future and for rising the youth generation as well. So I think there's many aspects into driving that agenda for humanitarian heritage that we need to look into, and that's why it's really important that that people from different disciplines need to be added into that conversation to have a more successful route and methodology towards that. So I hope I answered your questions, Dr. Sabih.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this explanation. Thank you, Dr. Jihan. Thank you, Professor.
I think one of the things which is interesting about your question and your answer, actually, Jihan, although we are in this workshop, we are contextualizing this within the Middle East. These are global issues.
Yeah.
These problems are being faced around the world. And just a few months ago, I did a virtual workshop in Uzbekistan. I'm doing some work in Uzbekistan, and I'm introducing them to the concept of humanitarian heritage. And they're saying, "What is humanitarian heritage?" And I'm trying to say, well, it's about trying to put humanity first, putting humanity back into the heritage. Because if we don't talk about all of the things that everybody's been talking about, spirit of place, youth, employment, intangible heritage, they're just piles of stones.
Yeah.
They're just empty places, you know. So we have to and I think the heritage community, and I'm very attached to the heritage community, have been overemphasizing the stones and the buildings for such a long time without thinking about what do they mean to people. So I think if we can just flip this and think about conservation of heritage as putting the humanity and the people first, I think that's a big thing. But it's a big change, and it's going on all over the world. It's not just doesn't affect the Middle East. It affects everywhere. So we have. Does anybody else? I'm conscious of time, and we have to finish on time. But does anybody else have a question that they want to raise? They can come on screen and raise their hand, or they can signal with the. No. Okay. Well, look, I'd like to draw this session to a close. We are very close to 1 o'clock, and to thank Jihan and Gada and again Professor Farhan for co-chairing, and for everybody who's participated this morning. I hope it's made us think about some of these bigger questions, and it's been a real pleasure to be part of this process. So